Hello, everyone. I thought I would take the chance today to do this little lecture to go through some of the information that you guys read and copied down on Friday. I unfortunately am at a meeting today, so I am sorry I cannot be with you. I will give you the chance to ask questions, though. I will be back in the building at the end of the day. I will see your questions. I will get them answered as part of our review tomorrow. I promise. So hopefully this quick lecture will help clear up some of the things that may be running through your head after looking at these notes on Friday. So the first thing that you guys looked at on Friday was about chemical reactions in general. And we're going to see that a lot of what cells do are just very complicated chemical reactions that make the cell function. So in summary, during a chemical reaction, we have chemical bonds being broken and new bonds being formed. Okay, so when we look at a chemical reaction, the initial materials that are beginning the reaction, we call the reactants. Okay, those are the ones that are changed during a chemical reaction. Okay, so those bonds are going to be broken, and then new substances with new bonds are going to be formed. Those are our products. Okay, so the products are the things that are made by a chemical reaction. And those are two totally different substances. They look different, they're going to react different chemically, might have different uses in cells. So totally different substances, okay, are formed by a chemical reaction. That's our definition. I hope we remember the two types of chemical bonds that we talked about at the beginning of the unit. They are covalent bonds and ionic bonds. Okay, that was the answer to that question. So anytime we look at a chemical reaction, we're going to be interested in the way that energy changes through the course of the reaction. So anytime we break bonds in a reaction, that's going to require energy. We have to input energy to break those bonds. And then when new bonds are formed, energy is released into the environment. Okay, so there are a lot of different reactions that occur in cells where we actually see what we call reversible reactions. So this example right here at the bottom is a reversible reaction. So carbon dioxide and water can form a compound called carbonic acid. Okay, so this happens a lot in our cells, and we can transport the carbonic acid to our lungs where it can get exhaled. Okay, so that's one reaction that occurs, the formation of that carbonic acid. But we also see the reverse happening, that carbonic acid being separated back into carbon dioxide and water. So when those two reactions are happening at the same speed, so every time carbonic acid is formed, there's another molecule that's broken down. When that's happening at the same rate, we call that at equilibrium. Okay, and we talk about that again for those reversible reactions. So true or false, when a chemical bond is broken, energy is released. That is false. When a chemical bond is formed, energy is released. It always takes energy. We have to add energy to break a bond. So true or false, a reactant is formed during a chemical reaction. That is false. A product is formed during a chemical reaction. So when we look at the overall process of a chemical reaction, we always have to add in energy to initially break those bonds, to get the reactants into the right position in order to react. So we call that initial energy it takes to get the ball moving. We call that activation energy. So you can see that illustrated here with the man pushing his ball up the hill. Okay, that's activation energy. And every reaction has some activation energy to get those reactants into the right position so the reaction can occur. Okay, so there are two different types of chemical reactions we're going to talk about. The first type are called exothermic reactions. And when you look at the overall process of the reaction, energy is released into the environment. So if you look at this graph here at the bottom of the slide, you can see the height of the reactants is higher than the height of the products. So overall, yes, we had to add energy to get over that activation energy, but after that, there's this really steep drop as the products are formed. So the energy of the products is lower than the energy of the reactants. So overall, energy is released into the environment. That makes this an exothermic reaction. And that energy can be released in the form of heat, light, sometimes even sound. Okay, so again, exothermic overall energy is released into the environment. Well, the opposite is also true. We have endothermic reactions where the energy of the reactants is actually lower than the energy of the products, meaning that overall we had to add more energy to get the reaction started than we get at the end when the reaction is finished. Okay, so you can see that the products are higher on this graph than the reactants. So overall energy is added in from the environment. And sometimes if you were to actually do this in a beaker or some kind of container, you could feel the container get colder as heat from the environment is added in to that container. Okay. So overall energy is absorbed during the reaction. So this particular reaction here, you can see the reactants are much higher than that of the products. So overall, this would be an exothermic reaction as those reactants, as the reaction happened, we add that activation energy, and then there's that steep drop as the products are formed. Okay. All right, so enzymes are catalysts for chemical reactions. And catalysts are chemicals that help chemical reactions happen efficiently, and they do not get used up during the reaction. And we'll see an example of that when we do lab later this week. Okay, so catalysts help reactions occur by making the reaction happen quicker. Okay, and how they make that reaction happen quicker is by decreasing the amount of activation energy. So it doesn't need to go up quite as steep a hill in order to get that reaction to start. So it can happen faster. You can see that in this graph here. The initial reaction, the solid line is much higher. That hill for activation energy is much higher than the dotted line at the bottom, which is with the catalyst. Okay, so overall the reaction would be able to happen quicker and decrease the amount of activation energy needed in order for the reaction to occur. So enzymes only work under very specific conditions. Okay, most living things have enzymes and they are proteins. So they are those chains of amino acids that are hooked together by peptide bonds. We talked about that last Thursday. So the monomer of a protein is an amino acid. So enzymes are going to have lots of amino acids joined together. And they can help reactions, again, in cells happen more efficiently. Okay, so with enzymes being made of proteins are pretty sensitive molecules, and they only keep their three-dimensional shape in very specific conditions. Okay, so cells really need to make sure that they keep their temperature stable and that they keep the pH stable, that it doesn't get too acidic or too basic, or else proteins lose their shape. Proteins work by having a very specific three-dimensional structure to in order to do their job. So those amino acids get joined together in that long chain, and it gets bent and twisted in order to make its three-dimensional structure. Okay, and enzymes can only do their job if they have the right shape. Okay, so and if the cell gets too hot or too cold, or the pH gets too high or too low, the protein cannot hold its shape and the enzyme would not be able to do its job. Okay? And enzymes are pretty awesome because they help reactions happen in cells, but they only work for very certain reactants. Enzymes have a very specific three-dimensional shape that only very specific molecules will fit. So these molecules that get helped by the enzymes, the reactants for the reaction that the cell needs, we call those substrates. So you can see that here by the orangish and the blue shapes. Those are the substrates. Those are the reactants that the cell is going to have react. And then enzymes have these specific shaped parts to them that we call the active site. That's where those substrates can bind. Okay, so we call this the lock and key model, where we see the substrates binding to the active site, and then the enzyme can join those reactants together and form the product that the cell needs. Okay, I hope that you were able to answer this question and come up with something that you learned about enzymes or chemical reactions and a way that this would impact you in your own life.